A fierce storm blanketed the empty road that night. The truck sped recklessly through the darkness, its headlights sweeping across puddles of water. Inside the truck's bed, 6 black children were tightly bound, their eyes wide with terror. Who were they? What were they running from? And who was chasing them? Suddenly, the truck swerved, plummeting into a ravine. An explosion shattered the night. When the police arrived, there were no bodies, no trace, no explanation. The 6 children had vanished without a single clue. Where had they gone? 2 hours later, William Carter drove along the narrow road. Out of nowhere, his headlights illuminated 6 small figures standing still in the pouring rain. Why were they here? What had happened to them? He slammed on the brakes. As the car window rolled down, the oldest one stepped forward, voice trembling. "Sir, they'll come back and kill us." The wind swept through, and a piece of paper fluttered down at William's feet. He bent down, his eyes narrowing as he read the smudged words. "Don't let them remember." But who were they, and why must the children be kept from recalling their past? In the distance, a gunshot echoed. What was really going on? Had William truly stumbled upon these children, or was this a trap that had already been set? The rain poured down like a waterfall, tearing through the quiet night of the Louisiana outskirts. The wind howled with brutal force, slamming into the bare tree branches along the road, making them crash against each other with a horrifying clatter. The interstate was desolate, with only the streaks of rainwater splashing up from the slick black asphalt. Suddenly, in the distance, a pair of headlights flared brightly, cutting through the storm, reflecting off the wet road like wild eyes in the dark. An old truck raced recklessly, its engine roaring as if about to explode, its tires grinding against the pavement, leaving behind long, slippery marks. Inside the cab, the driver gripped the steering wheel tightly, his hands sweating, his eyes darting nervously to the rearview mirror. His face was pale, breathing rapidly, as though someone was chasing him. The truck swayed violently, the back tires slipping sideways on the slick road, but he didn't slow down. In the bed of the truck, 6 black children huddled in the dark, their hands and feet bound with rough rope. Soft sobs echoed, drowned by the sound of the rain hammering on the metal roof. One of them, the oldest boy, about 9 years old, struggled to move, trying to untangle the ropes. But the more he squirmed, the tighter the knots dug into his skin. No one knew why they were here. No one remembered what had happened before, only that fear was suffocating every breath. Suddenly, a strange noise came from behind. The driver froze, glancing quickly in the mirror. His eyes widened when he saw a pair of white headlights right on his tail, following him like an inescapable shadow. He cursed under his breath and slammed the accelerator. The truck sped up, but the vehicle behind didn't slow down either. His breathing grew more frantic, his hands shaking, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Then, from the darkness, a gunshot rang out. The left rearview mirror shattered, shards of glass flying everywhere, embedding into the driver's arm, causing him to scream in agony. The truck lurched, losing control, the back tire sliding along the soaked road. He tried to steer, to regain balance, but it was too late. A sudden bend in the road appeared. The truck skidded sideways, lost momentum, and plunged down a steep embankment. The freefall sensation lasted only a few seconds before a deafening explosion ripped through the night. Flames erupted violently, lighting up the dark sky. Not far away, William Carter was driving home after his night shift. He furrowed his brow as a flash of light lit up the rain, followed by a thunderous explosion. His heart tightened. A crash? Or was something else going on? He immediately swerved, turning onto the dirt road, heading toward the scene. No one could have known that this moment would change his life forever. The rain fell heavily as William Carter stopped his car by the roadside, his gaze tense as he watched the smoldering wreckage in the distance. Police cars surrounded the scene, their flashing lights reflecting in the muddy puddles. Rescue workers rushed back and forth, searching for any signs of life. But the strange thing was, there were no bodies in the burned wreckage. No one. Only 6 children stood there, trembling in the rain, their clothes soaked, their eyes wide with fear, scanning the surroundings like trapped animals. William stepped out of his car and walked toward the police. A middle-aged officer, his face stern, stood with his arms crossed, watching the children. No ID, no relatives, No one knows where they came from. He shrugged indifferently. William frowned. So who will take care of them? The officer sighed and glanced at a social worker flipping through a soggy file. The orphanage is full. If no one adopts them, they'll probably be sent to a holding facility. The children huddled together at the mention of those words. The oldest boy clenched his fists, his dark eyes staring down at the ground, as if he had grown accustomed to being abandoned by this world. William looked at the kids, then back at the charred wreckage behind them. A strange feeling rose in his chest, something more than pity, a gut feeling that these children could not be left behind. He swallowed hard and spoke decisively. I'll take them home. Silence fell over the group. A social worker looked up, surprised. The officer raised an eyebrow, a mocking smile on his face. You sure? Just you? 6 black kids in this town. His voice was filled with skepticism, but William didn't hesitate. I'm sure. No one said anything more. A social worker handed him a temporary paper, as if just wanting to quickly wash their hands of the responsibility. When William approached the children, they looked up at him. Their eyes held no trust, only fear and suspicion. But when he took off his jacket and draped it over the trembling shoulders of the oldest boy, he felt something, a flicker of hope in the boy's eyes. Get in the car, he said gently. The children had no choice. They quietly climbed into the car, still keeping their distance from each other and from him. William looked back and noticed some of the town's people watching from a distance, curious, wary, even uncomfortable glances. He knew what awaited him ahead, but he didn't care. When the car door closed, he knew that from this moment on, his life would never be the same again. The dawn was beginning to break, but the sky above Louisiana remained a dull, overcast gray. The rain, which had poured relentlessly through the night, had dwindled to a faint drizzle, barely making a sound as it fell lightly on the roof. William Carter stood by the window, his hands wrapped around a now cold cup of coffee, his eyes locked on the 6 children sitting in the living room. They were huddled close together on an old, worn couch, their expressions a mixture of fear and confusion, still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Not a word had been spoken since they arrived. They had remained completely silent throughout the entire drive home, not once revealing anything about the traumatic events they had endured. Their silence was deafening, and it gnawed at William's insides, making him feel uneasy. 6 children, no identification, no family members searching for them, no one knowing where they had come from. A terrifying car crash that left no trace of the driver or any adults accompanying them. No explanations, no answers, just empty questions hanging in the air. The entire situation felt too wrong, too off. He placed the coffee cup on the table and slowly walked toward the old leather bag the children had brought with them. It was drenched, soaked through with rainwater, the mud caked onto it, but it was still intact. It had survived the storm, but what about its contents? With trembling hands, William unzipped the bag, his heart thudding in his chest. Inside, he found only a few disorganized items, an old, ragged sweater, a stuffed teddy bear missing one eye, and a few crumpled pieces of paper. As he examined each item carefully, hoping for some clue, some shred of understanding about these children, he stumbled upon something that seemed to stand out. In the smallest compartment of the bag, a folded piece of paper fell out, catching the dim light. William picked it up, his hands trembling. The paper was wet, its edges frayed and torn, but the words written on it were still legible. He felt his heart skip a beat as he slowly unfolded the note, staring at the hastily scribbled message. Don't let them remember. The words were scrolled quickly, as if written in a panic, the ink running in some places, smudged and faded. A cold shiver ran down William's spine as he read the words over and over again. It was a warning, but who had written this? And more importantly, why? His eyes darted back to the children, who were still sitting motionless on the couch. They hadn't spoken a word, but their eyes, those eyes, had shifted. For the first time since he'd met them, William sensed something different. The oldest boy, the one who had spoken to him the night before, was staring at the note with an intensity that made William's breath catch in his throat. His gaze was dark, almost hollow, as if something deep inside him had just been stirred. William cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice calm. "Do you recognize this paper?" he asked, holding it out. The boy didn't respond right away. The others, sensing the tension, began to look up, their faces tight with anxiety. They exchanged nervous glances, but none of them spoke. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the oldest boy slowly shook his head. I don't remember, he muttered, his voice soft, distant, as if the words didn't quite belong to him. William's grip tightened on the piece of paper. A deep, unsettling feeling settled in his chest. If the children truly couldn't remember, then who had written the note? And why did it feel like they were terrified of what they might recall? What was it that they had forgotten, or perhaps been made to forget? His thoughts raced, each question more troubling than the last. Outside the window, the rain had stopped completely, leaving behind a thick, heavy silence. But just as William thought he might have a moment to collect himself, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. From the distance, at the far end of the dirt road leading to his home, a black car was parked, its tinted windows obscuring the inside. The engine was still running, but no one had stepped out. The vehicle sat there, unmoving, like a shadow in the rain-soaked landscape. William's unease deepened, and a cold knot tightened in his stomach. His instinct screamed at him. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. The strange events of the previous night were not over. No, they were just beginning. He glanced back at the children. Their faces were filled with fear, but they remained silent, as if afraid to speak, as if afraid to remember. William's thoughts swirled, the pieces of the puzzle refusing to come together. He didn't know what was waiting for him, but one thing was clear. This was far from over. Something had begun, and he could feel it in every fiber of his being. The next move, whatever it was, would change everything. The faint morning sunlight filtered through the cracks in the door, casting a soft glow on the small kitchen of William Carter's home. 6 children sat around an old wooden table, quietly eating a simple breakfast, bread and milk. The atmosphere seemed less tense than the night before, but there was still a noticeable weariness in their eyes. William stood at a distance, observing their every move. Last night, they had been fearful, silent children, but now he was starting to notice something strange. These weren't just ordinary kids. After breakfast, William tried to start a conversation with them, asking simple questions about their names and ages, but most of them only responded with shakes of their heads. It was as if they weren't even sure about who they were. The odd feeling continued to grow when he placed an old newspaper on the table with a Sudoku puzzle printed on it. Just a few seconds later, a girl around 7 years old grabbed the pen and filled in all the boxes perfectly, so quickly that William couldn't believe his eyes. It didn't stop there. The youngest boy happened to glance at the TV screen, where a news report was discussing the stock market. After a brief moment of thought, the boy spoke up. "McLaren stock will drop sharply in the next 2 days." William froze. This boy was only about 6 years old, yet he was talking like an economic expert. To test it further, he opened an old math book of his and placed it in front of David, the oldest boy. "Do you understand any of this?" David looked up at him and, without hesitation, began reading the formulas aloud, then solved a complex problem in a matter of seconds. William was stunned. He had met many smart children before, but the speed at which these kids were learning surpassed anything he had ever seen. They weren't just smart, they were extraordinarily intelligent. But what shocked William the most was David. In a brief moment, the boy stopped, staring intently at the cold coffee cup on the table, and then suddenly said, "Uncle William, you shouldn't leave the house tomorrow." His voice was calm, but his gaze was so serious that it sent a chill down William's spine. William frowned. "Why?" David shook his head. "I don't know, but something will happen." The words made William uneasy. How could a child speak about the future with such certainty? Could this boy really see something others couldn't? An air of mystery hung over the house. William glanced at the children. They weren't just special, they were a puzzle he couldn't yet solve. And the biggest question now was, who had created them? As time passed, the small house of William Carter no longer felt empty. The 6 children gradually adapted to their new life, no longer the hesitant, frightened beings they had been at first. Breakfasts were no longer filled with tense silence, but instead with the sounds of giggles when the youngest spilled milk on the table, or when they raced to see who could solve math problems the fastest. Although many mysteries still surrounded the children's origins, William no longer focused on them. He found himself growing to love them like his own children, no longer seeing the act of adopting them as a temporary obligation, but as something he genuinely wanted. He sought to protect them from whatever lurked outside. Each day passed with him teaching them the little yet important things: how to plant a sapling, how to fix a broken chair, how to look someone in the eye when speaking. They learned quickly, not just academically, but also the moral values that William held dear. David, the oldest of the group, grew especially close to him. The boy helped William fix the car in the garage, listening intently as William shared stories about his life as a man who had lost everything and was now finding meaning through these strange children. "Uncle William, do you regret it?" David had asked one night as the two of them sat on the porch, watching the streetlight flicker in the wind. William chuckled and ruffled the boy's head. "No, David. I've never felt more sure that I'm doing the right thing than I do now." But then, strange things started happening. One night, William woke up in the middle of the night to an odd noise. He quietly made his way down the stairs, pausing before the living room when he saw the door slightly ajar. The 6 children were sitting in a circle on the floor in the darkness. Not a word was spoken. They stared at each other as if communicating with some invisible language that William couldn't understand. A chill ran down his spine, but before he could speak, David turned to him, his expression solemn. "Uncle William, you shouldn't have woken up," the boy said calmly, but there was an odd weight to his words. William froze, his hand gripping the door frame. Something was changing, something that he couldn't yet comprehend, and more importantly, something that the children didn't want him to know. That night, the wind howled through the trees, the sound of branches creaking and snapping in the distance. The air felt thick with tension, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Inside the small house of William Carter, everything was silent except for the soft breathing of the 6 children in their rooms. The faint flickering of the streetlight outside cast long shadows, giving the world beyond the windows an eerie, almost unnatural feel. William, however, could not sleep. The stillness of the night seemed suffocating, as if something unseen was looming just beyond the edge of his awareness. A strange, indescribable feeling gnawed at him, a sensation that something was waiting, something was about to happen. He shifted restlessly in bed, unable to shake the nagging unease that clung to him. He had been through countless nights of solitude and grief, but tonight felt different. The feeling was more than just a passing instinct. It was a deep, almost primal certainty that something was wrong. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, trying to push away the growing sense of dread. But then, there it was, the faintest sound, barely perceptible, coming from the back door. At first, William thought it might just be the wind rustling the leaves outside. But then it came again, softer this time, a faint scraping sound followed by a delicate creak, as though someone were slowly and deliberately attempting to open the door. His heart began to race. He reached for the baseball bat that was always kept by the bed, a small measure of protection in a world that had seemed to grow more uncertain by the day. Quietly, he slipped out of bed, moving slowly so as not to wake the children. He stepped into the dark hallway, the house completely silent except for the sound of his footsteps. He paused for a moment, listening intently. The wind outside howled through the trees again, but it was the faint clicking sound that caught his attention, like someone had stepped carefully across the floor, making sure not to make a noise. The sound was coming from his office. His breath caught in his throat. He crept closer to the door, his muscles tense, his grip tightening around the bat. The old house seemed to groan under the weight of the silence. Every creak of the floorboards under his feet amplified in the stillness. He reached the door, hesitating for a moment before gently pushing it open. The room was cloaked in darkness, but his eyes quickly adjusted. The outline of a figure stood by his desk, casting a shadow over the papers scattered across it. The figure wasn't rifling through valuables or looking for money. Instead, the intruder was flipping through a stack of papers, his papers, documents William had kept related to the children. The man's fingers moved quickly over the pages, scanning them as if searching for something specific. William's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a random break-in. This was something far more deliberate. His mind raced as he considered the implications. Who was this person? What did they want with the children's files? His body instinctively tensed, and he stepped forward, only for the wind to howl again, sending a gust of cold air through the window and making the cabinet door behind the intruder rattle. The man whirled around, his face momentarily illuminated in the dim light. In that brief moment, William saw the man's face. Cold, emotionless, with sharp, calculating eyes. The look in his eyes was unnerving, as if he were assessing every detail, every weakness in the room. The man froze for an instant. Then, as if realizing he had been caught, darted quickly toward the back door, moving with the speed of a shadow. William's instincts kicked in, and he rushed forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He grabbed for the door handle, throwing it open, but by the time he stepped outside and flicked on the porch light, the figure had vanished into the night. There were no footprints, no sounds, no sign of where the man had gone. It was as if he had melted into the darkness. William stood there, staring into the empty night, his mind reeling. He could feel his pulse racing, his breath shallow. The sensation of fear was sharp, biting at the edges of his thoughts. Who was that man? And why had he been looking through those papers? But more than that, something deep inside him was telling him that this was no ordinary break-in. It was a warning that he couldn't yet understand. He turned back into the house, his mind still racing, his heart still pounding in his chest. The papers were still on the desk, the pages slightly trembling from the movement. William's gaze dropped to the surface, and something caught his eye, a piece of paper, slightly crumpled, with red ink scrolled across it. He reached down, his fingers trembling as he unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the hastily written message, which seemed to have been written in a rush, each word sharp and disjointed. They must not remember. William felt a chill run down his spine as the words sank in. The red ink seemed to burn into his vision, the urgency of the message unmistakable. His hands shook slightly as he placed the paper back on the desk. There was something wrong here, something he couldn't quite put his finger on, but something that had to do with the children, with the note, with the man who had been in his house. And then there was that feeling, the feeling that this wasn't the first time someone had been watching. Outside, the night was thick with darkness, and somewhere in the shadows, someone or something was still watching. That morning began like any other. William woke up early, brewed a cup of coffee, and stepped out onto the porch to breathe in the fresh Louisiana air. The small house was peaceful, bathed in the soft golden light streaming through the windows. He walked back inside, preparing the usual breakfast, toast, eggs, and a glass of milk for each of the children. But as he approached the dining table, an unexpected chill ran down his spine. Something wasn't right. 6 glasses of milk sat neatly arranged on the table, but only 5 children were sitting there. William froze, his eyes scanning the faces around the table. David, the curly-haired girl, the twins, the youngest boy. But Noah was not there. His heart tightened. Where's Noah? His voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable tension beneath the words. The others were silent. They looked at each other as if trying to find an answer. David, the oldest, spoke slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. Uncle William, Noah is gone. William immediately rushed to the boys' room. The bed was undisturbed, the blankets smooth and untouched. There was no sign of a struggle or a fight. The wardrobe was closed tightly, the window was locked. Everything was too normal to be reassuring. If Noah had run away, why hadn't he taken anything with him? And if someone had taken him, why were there no signs of a break-in? He tore through the house, calling Noah's name over and over. The other children joined in, splitting up to search, but there was no trace of him anywhere. When William reached the backyard, his heart nearly stopped. The back door was unlocked. A terrible thought flashed through his mind. Had someone come in last night? Had the intruder returned? But why only Noah? And most importantly, why had there been no noise? William immediately called the police, but the response he received was cold and indifferent. Children go missing every day, Mr. Carter. Maybe the boy just ran off. A surge of anger welled up inside him. Noah couldn't have run away. The boy had nowhere to go. And more than that, William had an unmistakable feeling this wasn't an accident. He turned back to the remaining children. They were huddled together, their eyes filled with fear. But when William looked at David, he saw something different. It wasn't panic, it wasn't worry. It was something deeper. David, William whispered, his voice trembling. You know what's going on, don't you? David stayed silent for a moment. Then he looked up, his eyes dark, his voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. Noah was chosen. A cold shiver ran down William's spine. Chosen? What did that mean? Who had chosen him? And why? The unease that had been a vague feeling before now solidified into a distinct, palpable fear, the fear that Noah hadn't just gone missing, but that he had been taken. William drove to the police station, holding on to a faint hope that someone would care about Noah's disappearance. But as soon as he stepped inside, the indifference in the officer's eyes hit him like a cold slap. "Children going missing isn't exactly rare, Mr. Carter," the middle-aged officer said, not bothering to lift his head from the file in front of him. "Maybe the boy just ran away." William clenched his fists. Ran away? A child with no ID, no money, no relatives disappearing in the night without a trace? Do you really believe this is just a runaway case? The officer glanced up, his gaze lazy, before shrugging. "If there's no evidence of kidnapping, there's nothing we can do." William felt his anger rise, but he struggled to control it. Nothing he said seemed to make a difference. He left the police station in frustration and drove back to town. Maybe the neighbors had seen something. Maybe someone had heard something unusual the night Noah went missing. But as he went door to door, the responses he received were nothing but cold indifference. "Mr. Carter, this isn't my business," a man said, his gaze avoiding William's. "I don't want to get involved in any trouble," a woman whispered before slamming the door shut. William couldn't believe it. A child had gone missing, and no one cared. The town had always been cold, but this wasn't just apathy. It felt like fear, as if they knew something but were too afraid to speak. By the time he returned home, the remaining children were huddled together on the couch, their faces filled with panic. They weren't the confident, intelligent children he had known before. They were now the frightened victims of some unseen force. David looked up as William entered, his eyes colder and sharper than ever before. "They won't help, Uncle William," David said softly. "You'll have to find Noah before they come back." William stared at the boy, a shiver running down his spine. "Who are they?" David didn't answer. He remained silent, as if the answer was too horrifying to speak aloud. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in William's house grew suffocating. Noah remained missing without a trace, the police indifferent, and the neighbors silent, as if no child had ever existed. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the town's apathy. It was the eerie feeling that crept through every corner of the house, a sense that something worse was drawing near. William began staying up later, keeping a close watch over the children, never letting them out of his sight. But no matter how hard he tried, the thing he feared most came to pass. 3 days after Noah disappeared, the curly-haired girl, Sophia, was also gone. Her bed was untouched, the window shut tight, the front door locked from the inside. William turned the house upside down, calling her name until his voice was hoarse, but there was no answer. Once again, the police refused to help. They didn't even bother to file a report. On the 5th day, the twin boys, Daniel and Elijah, disappeared together. William clearly remembered the night before, when he checked all the doors before going to sleep, locking each one tight, and even placing a chair in front of the children's bedroom door. But the next morning, the room was empty. No signs of a struggle, no strange noises in the night. It was as if they had been erased from this world. This time, William didn't bother with the police. He knew they would do nothing. Instead, he wandered aimlessly, searching through the woods, crossing empty roads, stopping at every corner, asking anyone he came across. But no one had seen anything. No one remembered the children. The fear inside him grew, morphing into a wave of despair. He couldn't explain what was happening. They had disappeared without a trace, without a sound, without a word of goodbye. Only 3 children remained: David, Amelia, and the youngest boy, Liam. William confined himself to the house, keeping the children close at all times. But even that wasn't enough to prevent the next tragedy. 9 days after Noah went missing, Amelia disappeared in broad daylight. William had left the room for less than 3 minutes to get a glass of water, and when he returned, she was gone. The door was still locked, the window still shut. There were no signs of anything unusual, only a small piece of paper on the table with the same hastily written words he had found in the old bag of the children. "Don't let them remember." William's heart seemed to stop. Now there were only 2 children left. He knew he was about to lose everything, and he could do nothing to stop it. William had lost track of how many days had passed since the first child disappeared. The house, once filled with laughter, was now haunted by an eerie silence. Only 2 children remained, but he knew that wouldn't last. He had tried staying up every night, locking himself in the house with David and Liam, but it changed nothing. The children vanished as if sucked into some invisible void, a place he could not reach. That night, it rained. The storm rolled in, bringing gusts of wind that lashed against the windows, creating a low, whispering sound from the darkness. William sat on the chair, his eyes heavy from exhaustion, when a knock on the door startled him. He jolted upright. It was well past midnight. Who would be here at this hour? He glanced at the two remaining children. David was sitting up, his eyes sharp with alertness, as though he had known this moment would come. William grabbed the baseball bat that was kept by the door, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Standing before him was a man in a long gray coat, the brim of his hat pulled low, obscuring most of his face. The stranger didn't step inside but silently held out a thick stack of documents wrapped in a piece of old, waterlogged plastic. "Mr. Carter," the man's voice was low and gravelly. "You need to see this immediately." William took the documents, feeling the dampness of the paper under his fingers. He was about to ask the stranger who he was, but before he could speak, the man took a step back, his eyes flashing with a warning. "Don't trust anyone," he said quickly, "and don't let the children remember." With that, he turned and disappeared into the night, as if he had never existed. William stood frozen at the door for a few seconds before hurriedly slamming it shut, his hand gripping the stack of papers. His heart pounded in his chest as he ripped off the outer layer of plastic and opened the first page. Before him were 6 names: Noah, Sophia, Daniel, Elijah, Amelia, Liam, written in bold black ink. Beneath them was a line, underlined repeatedly, scrawled in a rushed, frantic handwriting. They were never orphans. The room seemed to spin around him. His hands trembled as he turned to the next page, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Photographs of the children, but not from the present. These were from years ago, in stark, sterile rooms, wearing identical uniforms. There were charts, reports, and handwritten notes filled with scientific terminology. He looked up at David. The boy didn't seem surprised. He just sat there, silent, his eyes darkened as if he had known all along. "Uncle William," David said quietly, his tone unnervingly calm. "Do you understand now?" William didn't respond. He didn't want to understand. But deep down, he knew that from this moment on, the truth could no longer be buried. William sat frozen in the chair, his hands trembling as they hovered above the stack of documents in front of him. The truth, stark and undeniable, was laid out before him, but his mind fought to reject it. Everything in those papers was so clear, so detailed, but he couldn't bring himself to believe what he was reading. The 6 children had never been orphans. They hadn't been abandoned. They had been brought here, placed deliberately. But by who? And for what purpose? David stood silently nearby, his eyes betraying no emotion. The boy was no longer the frightened, confused child William had found in the storm that night. Now he seemed unnervingly calm, his expression as steady as if he had known everything that was happening all along. William could feel a knot tightening in his chest, his mind racing. He fought to keep his voice steady as he spoke, but there was an edge of desperation in his words. "David, how long have you known about this?" The silence between them thickened, each second stretching out longer than the last. David didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained steady, fixed somewhere beyond William, as if the weight of the situation was something he had already come to terms with. Finally, David took a step forward, reached for the next page in the file, and turned it with slow deliberation. His fingers skimmed over the paper before he pointed to a photograph, one that sent a sharp pang through William's heart. The photograph was old, yellowing at the edges, showing the 6 children much younger than they were now. They were lined up in a sterile white room, each of them wearing identical uniforms, their faces emotionless, staring blankly at the camera. It was a haunting image, one that seemed to rob them of their individuality. But what struck William the most was the note beneath the photograph, the words that seemed to burn into his mind. Echo 12 experiment sample. Memory and cognitive control test. Status, active. The words echoed in his ears, the significance of them crashing into him like a tidal wave. His pulse quickened, his throat constricting with panic. It wasn't just a test. It was an experiment on the children. He could barely breathe as he turned his gaze back to David, his voice trembling as he asked, Who are you? David didn't flinch. His face remained calm, his eyes not betraying a single shred of emotion. The weight of what he was about to reveal hung in the air between them. William's heart pounded louder in his chest as David finally spoke. I am the one you chose to raise, David said, his voice calm and unsettlingly measured. But I am also the one they chose to remember. The words struck William like a slap in the face. He felt the floor beneath him shift, the world spinning out of control. He stumbled slightly, his mind struggling to catch up with the truth that was unfolding before him. His breath came in shallow gasps, the horror of it sinking in. If the other children had disappeared because they were not allowed to remember, then what did it mean that David, the oldest, the one who had always seemed to know more than he let on, was the one who had been chosen to remember? What had they done to him? And what was the cost of that knowledge? William tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. He looked at David, but the boy only stared back, his expression unreadable. There was something in his eyes, a quiet sadness perhaps, but also a kind of understanding, as if David had known this day would come, and as if he had long since made peace with it. But for William, the weight of the truth was unbearable. Outside, the rain intensified, its relentless rhythm beating against the windows like the world itself was mourning the revelation that had just shattered everything William thought he knew. The house, once a place of warmth, now felt like a prison, the walls closing in around him as the cold reality of the situation pressed down harder than ever before. William could barely breathe as fear, confusion, and anger consumed him. He didn't know what to do next. He didn't know if he could protect the last two children, David and Liam, from whatever was coming next. And even more terrifying, he didn't know what kind of consequences there would be for the boy standing in front of him, the boy who had been chosen to remember. David didn't speak again. He simply turned away, his small, frail figure moving with unsettling calm as he walked toward the other room, leaving William to grapple with the crushing weight of the truth. The words still echoed in William's mind. They were never orphans. A truth too horrifying to accept, yet too undeniable to ignore. William stood there for what felt like an eternity, unable to move, unable to process everything that had just been revealed. The truth about the children, about their origins, about the experiments they had been subjected to, it was all too much. The questions swirled in his mind, but the answers seemed just out of reach, taunting him. He had opened a door that could never be closed again. The truth was out, and there was no going back. But what did that mean for the children he had come to love as his own? What had they been through? What did they remember? And what did the people who had chosen them want? A shudder ran through him as he glanced back at the documents, his hands trembling as he reached for the next page. But he already knew there was no escaping this nightmare. And no matter how much he wanted to protect them, the children, especially David, were part of something much larger, something far darker than he had ever imagined. The storm outside intensified, but it wasn't the weather that chilled William to the bone. It was the knowledge that, in the end, he was just another pawn in a much larger game. The rain outside continued to fall steadily, each drop hitting the roof in a rhythmic pattern, almost like a warning of something terrible that was about to unfold. William couldn't tear his eyes away from the stack of documents laid out before him. The yellowed pages were filled with information, detailed reports about the 6 children, notes about the experiments, and worse still, his name was in there. His hand clenched around the edge of the table as he continued reading. EC12 experimental sample. Cognitive development phase. Control group. Artificial memory experiment. Supervisor, William Carter. His heart seemed to stop. Supervisor? No, this must be a mistake. He had never participated in any research, never signed any documents related to this. But no, these files could not have been fabricated. Everything was meticulously documented. Days when he adopted the children, the events surrounding them, even his own words were recorded. It was as if he was nothing more than a pawn in a plan that had been set in motion long before. He looked up, his eyes locking with David's. The boy showed no surprise, no shock at all when faced with this document. There was no confusion, no disbelief in his eyes. A cold fear ran down William's spine. How long have you known about this? He asked, his voice tight. David slowly walked over to the table, his gaze calm to the point of being unsettling. It's not that I know. It's that I've always remembered. William shook his head, trying to piece everything together. An organization was behind all of this. An organization that had programmed the lives of the 6 children from the very beginning, making them forget their pasts, only to place them in an entirely new environment under the watch of someone like him. A person who would nurture them with sincerity to ensure they developed according to the plan. But what was the plan? And why? Now was only David left. Uncle William, David continued, his gaze as sharp as ever. You weren't the one who chose us. They chose you. William felt the room spin around him. The questions in his mind piled up, each one more terrifying than the last. Who were they? Why had they done this? And most frightening of all, did he truly have any control over anything in this entire story? From the corner of his vision, through the darkness outside the window, he saw a black car pull up. The windows were dark, the engine still running, but no one stepped out. A chill ran down William's spine. He was no longer the only one watching. The rain had intensified, lashing against the windows with a relentless fury. Each raindrop that struck the glass seemed to echo through the house, adding to the suffocating silence that had settled in. William could barely breathe. The house that had once felt like a home now felt like a trap, a place where his every movement was watched, where every decision seemed to be part of a larger plan he could not escape. And at the center of it all stood David, no longer the innocent child he had tried to protect, but something far darker, far more unsettling. David's gaze never wavered from William's. It was as if the boy knew that this moment was inevitable, that William's questioning had led them to this point. There was no more pretense, no more lies, only the cold, hard truth that William wasn't ready to hear. The boy had grown up in front of him, and now the truth about who David truly was becoming impossible to ignore. William's heart raced, his thoughts jumbled. He had never asked for any of this. He had simply taken in the children, given them a home, tried to love them as his own. But now, with every word David spoke, the foundations of his world were crumbling, and the floor beneath him felt like it was giving way. David took a slow, deliberate step forward, his eyes piercing through William. The way the boy looked at him now felt completely alien. You were never meant to protect us, David continued, his voice growing colder with each word. You were meant to be the one they watched, the one they studied. You were their experiment too, Uncle William. William staggered back, the weight of David's words hitting him like a physical blow. His mind scrambled for answers, for any sense of understanding that could help him make sense of what was happening. But the more he thought, the more the pieces fell into place. The strange occurrences, the missing children, the way they had all been connected in ways he couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just the children who had been chosen. It was him too, a cog in a machine he had never seen, a part of a twisted game he hadn't even known he was playing. Why? Why didn't you tell me? William asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why didn't you warn me? David's face softened, but only slightly. His expression was still cold, but there was a flicker of something, regret perhaps, deep in his eyes. I couldn't, David said quietly. I wasn't allowed to. I wasn't supposed to remember. But they chose me to. They made sure I could. And when the time came, I had to remember. I had to know everything, just like you're going to. The words hung in the air like poison, each one more suffocating than the last. William felt his chest tighten. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the horror of it all had rendered him speechless. His hands shook as he reached for the stack of papers once more, flipping through the pages, the photographs of the children, the notes, the reports. They were all there, all the answers he had needed, but now they only served to condemn him. Suddenly, a noise broke through the tension. The sound of tires on gravel, the unmistakable screech of a car pulling up outside. William's heart skipped a beat. He knew in that moment that whatever was coming next would change everything. David's eyes flickered toward the window, then back at William, his expression unreadable. They're here, he said softly. William froze. He turned to the window, staring out into the rain-soaked night. A black car was parked just outside. The engine hummed softly, but no one stepped out. A chill ran down William's spine. He didn't know whether to run, to fight, or to just face whatever fate had been thrust upon him. Who are they, David? William asked, his voice cracking with the weight of his question. What do they want from us? David didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped toward the door, his movements calm, deliberate. You'll understand soon enough. But you need to be ready. He paused, glancing back over his shoulder. They've been watching us this entire time, Uncle William. Watching you too. You're just as much a part of this as any of us. Before William could say another word, David opened the door and stepped outside, disappearing into the night. William hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. But then the sense of urgency took over. He couldn't let David face whatever was out there alone. He couldn't let the child he had tried to protect fall into the hands of whoever was pulling the strings. William followed David outside, his breath catching in the cold, damp air. The rain soaked his clothes as he hurried across the yard, the black car looming in the darkness like a silent sentinel. He approached it slowly, his pulse quickening with every step. The door to the car creaked open, and William could just make out the shadowy figures inside. One of them stepped out, a tall man dressed in black, his face hidden beneath the brim of a hat. "You've made your choice, William," the man said in a low, menacing voice. "But you won't be the one to decide how this ends." William's mind raced, the walls closing in around him. He looked to David, who stood just beyond the car, watching him with those dark, knowing eyes. He wanted to scream, to fight back, to demand answers, but something inside him, something deep and primal, told him that the choices had already been made for him. "You never had control," the man continued, taking a step closer. "Not from the moment you brought them into your home. You were always part of the plan. And now, you will see the true nature of this experiment." William's heart sank. Experiment. The word echoed in his mind, sending a wave of nausea through him. What had he been a part of? What had he allowed to happen to these children? And worse still, what did it mean for the ones left behind? The man's cold eyes locked onto William's. "You're too late to stop it, but you're in the right place to witness the end." As the rain continued to fall around them, William realized something terrifying. He had never been the one in control. The children, David, and everything he thought he understood were part of a far larger and darker plan. And now, it was too late to back out. The final stage of the experiment had begun, and there was no turning back. William's heart hammered in his chest as the man stepped closer, his cold, emotionless eyes never leaving him. The rain poured down around them, the sound deafening as it pounded against the roof and soaked into the earth beneath. It was as if the entire world was being washed away, leaving nothing but the oppressive silence that hung between William and the stranger. David stood behind the car, watching quietly, his expression still unreadable. William wanted to shout at him, to demand answers, but the words caught in his throat. It was clear now that everything he had known, everything he had believed, was a lie. The children weren't the innocent victims of fate that he had hoped to protect. They were part of something much darker, something far beyond his understanding. The tall man took another step forward, his face still obscured by the shadow of his hat. "You should have never brought them into your life, William," he said, his voice low and cold. "You're just a tool in a much bigger plan, a pawn. And now you're going to see how deep this goes." William clenched his fists, trying to steady his breath. His mind was spinning, but one question repeated over and over again. "What do you want with the children? What are you doing to them?" The man smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was a predatory grin, one that sent a chill crawling up William's spine. "We're not doing anything to them, William. They're the ones who are doing this to themselves. You were just the catalyst. But don't worry, the experiment is almost over. It's time for you to see the truth." William's blood ran cold. "The truth?" "Yes," the man said, his smile widening. "The truth about why they were chosen, why they were brought into your life. The truth about their purpose. It's all coming together now. And you'll finally understand why you were chosen to be their guardian. Why you were the one who would raise them, protect them, and ultimately, why you were the one who would witness the end." William felt his legs tremble, and for a moment, he thought he might collapse. The weight of the revelation, the sheer horror of it, was too much to bear. He had never signed up for this. He had only wanted to give these children a home, but now everything was falling apart around him. "Why me?" William asked, his voice barely a whisper. The man looked at him as if he were speaking to a child. "Because, William, you were always meant to be part of this. You were chosen because you had the qualities necessary to bring them into the world of the experiment. Your compassion, your willingness to care for them, to love them unconditionally. That's what made you the perfect subject. But that doesn't matter anymore. The plan is almost complete. William's mind reeled. He wanted to run, to get away from this nightmare, but his body wouldn't move. His legs were like lead, and he felt trapped in a game that he had never asked to play. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The man stepped forward, his shadow engulfing William. "Now we wait. We let the final stages play out. The children, including David, will fulfill their roles. And you, William, will witness it all." David, standing by the car, finally spoke. His voice was eerily calm, as if he had accepted everything that was happening. "The truth is, Uncle William, you're just a bystander. You never had the power to change anything. We were always going to remember. And now, we have to see this through." William's heart dropped into his stomach. What does that mean? What's going to happen to the children? David stepped forward, his face now illuminated by the dim streetlights. His eyes were colder than ever. "What happens to us is what you've always feared. We have to remember the truth. We have to remember who we are. And once we do, the experiment will be complete." The words hung heavy in the air. William wanted to scream, to run, to fight back, but he was frozen. The cold, the fear, the helplessness, it all became too much to bear. His mind was in turmoil as the full weight of the situation descended on him. From behind him, he heard the engine of the black car rev up. William turned to see the car's headlights illuminate the driveway. The man in front of him stepped back, giving him one last chilling look. "It's time," the man said simply. William's world seemed to crumble around him. The answers, the truth, the horror, it was all too much to comprehend. He had thought he could protect the children. He had thought he could save them from whatever darkness had taken them. But now he realized the truth was far more insidious than he could have ever imagined. He had never been in control. David stood beside the car, looking at William with an expression of finality. "It's over, Uncle William. We have fulfilled our roles. The experiment is complete." As the rain poured down, the black car vanished into the night, leaving William standing in the driveway, his heart pounding with confusion and fear. The storm seemed to echo his turmoil, the darkness outside closing in around him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something so deeply unsettling that the very core of his reality felt like it was beginning to unravel. David's words, cold and indifferent, haunted him. "You were never meant to save us. You were just part of the experiment." What did he mean by that? What had he really been a part of? He glanced at the documents again, his mind racing. The pieces of the puzzle were now in place, but the image was distorted, incomplete. The experiment. But to what end? His eyes fell on the last page of the document. The final line scribbled in haste, barely legible. Subject 112 memory eraser protocol complete. Final phase, reprogramming. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Memory eraser. That was it. That was the missing piece. The children, no, not just the children, but he himself had been subjected to a process of manipulation, of removal. Their memories, their true selves, wiped clean, a life rewritten. But why? He had always thought the children's loss of memory was just some tragic accident. He never realized the deeper truth. They were never meant to remember their past. They were being controlled, reprogrammed. And it wasn't just them. He had been a part of that process all along. William's head spun as his thoughts scrambled to make sense of it all. What had been erased from his own memory? How much of his life had been altered without him knowing? And more frighteningly, was he the one who had been conditioned to? In that moment, everything around him seemed to blur. The house, the storm, the memory of the children. Everything faded into the background as the true horror began to sink in. William realized he might never be able to escape the truth. The only thing left now was to discover who was behind the erasure and why. What did they want from him? He walked shakily to the window, staring out at the darkened street. A black car, the same one, was parked down the road, waiting. But this time, it wasn't just the children being watched. It was him too. William turned away from the window, his breath ragged, knowing the final question that remained. Would he be able to uncover the truth before the final erasure? Or would he be wiped away, just like the children? With a shudder, he picked up the last document from the table. A sharp gasp escaped his lips as he saw the final word written across it: erase. The cold realization hit him like a tidal wave. There was no going back. As the camera zoomed in on his face, the haunting question echoed. Will William uncover the truth before they erase him completely? The journey into the nightmare of memory erasure had only just begun, and the truth promised to be more terrifying than anything imaginable.